Welcome to the chat. This is Jack Spillane from the New Bedford Light, and we have a special election edition of the chat tonight. We have great guests, two of the best, the best known, I won't say activists, party regulars on the South Coast, former Mayor Scott Lang and Jacob Ventura, longtime Republican and advisor to the party. You may know Scott's experience goes back as far as the Hubert Humphrey campaign and the Ted Kennedy campaigns of 1980. He's been former Mayor John Bullard's manager. Jacob, you may know from, he's been a labor lawyer and a corporate attorney for private equity now. He's been active in any number of issues, advising the Republican Party and others, and been a candidate himself for state senate and city council. Welcome to you both.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jack.
So tonight the topic is the 5 ballot questions, and it's just amazing. Massachusetts really seems to be drifting into a referendum state. It's the most ballot questions since the year 2000, and it just seems to get more and more. Part of the reason, I think, at least some analysts have said, is that the state legislature has a very opaque process in Massachusetts. It's overwhelmingly dominated by Democrats, and it exempts itself from the public records law. It exempts itself from the open meeting law. And a lot of these deliberations are done late at night at committee meetings that are not open to the public. I think some frustration with the legislature not attending to things that are on people's mind, in my mind, has led to these ballot proliferation. On the other hand, government by ballot is maybe not what the founders intended. We are a republic, and the legislature has the job of representing us. So there are two ways to look at it. I'll ask you to start out. Jacob, do you have any perspectives on Massachusetts having all these ballot questions?
I do. As a former candidate for the Senate, I faced this head on several years ago. And having worked in the legislature as a staff member with a member of the minority party here on the South Coast, it gave me a unique perspective about how Beacon Hill works from the inside, at least on the House side. There's a legislative process for a reason, which is very deliberative, very inefficient. It weeds out bad bills. And we could sit here all day and talk about that process. Thousands of bills are filed every legislative session. Only a handful actually make it to the governor's desk. And that deliberative committee process that's out in the public, where legislators are actually doing their job, lobbyists and advocates are reaching out to those folks at committee hearings. There's a process to deal with complex legislation. 4 of these questions on the ballot this year, in my opinion, ought to be in the legislature, not before the voters. I don't think it hurts to put this question before the voters, but my suspicion is the legislature will probably ignore the will of the voters on all 5 questions.
Scott, what do you think of all these ballot questions? Are they too many, or is it just taking the pulse of the public?
Well, first of all, I appreciated Jacob's answer to that. I think that it wouldn't be a good idea for the legislature to ignore the voters' will on these ballot questions. I also think that it takes the pulse of the public, but it also bubbles up the frustration of the public. Now, 2 of these ballot questions, I think, are motivated by outside the state interest, quite frankly. But 3 of the ballot questions, I think, are right on point. And the legislature should take great interest and heed what the voters decide on these. And I don't know how they're going to decide on them. I do know, though, that each of these cries out for legislative action. And all of these ballot questions, as Jacob said, would have to be worked through the legislative process to make sure that the kinks are out of the ballot questions once they're enacted into law. But I would be very, very much in favor of the legislature enacting legislation that parallels how the voters feel about these. I am for ballot questions. I'm for referendums. I think it makes sense. It is an important way for the voters to basically let their voices be heard. So I don't mind this process at all.
We know in the past, the legislature has ignored the referendums, the sales tax. The voters are said to roll it back. They did not. And when marijuana was first legalized, whole establishment of the state was against it, and voters overwhelmingly said they wanted to legalize it, and the legislature did follow it in that case. So it's interesting to see. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't.
It's funny on the marijuana one. I think that the rollout took some time. The rollout hasn't been perfect in any way. They probably need to go back to the drawing board and figure out a way to enact a legislative statute that more appropriately, or allow for regs that more appropriately have a marijuana economy. I think that the psychedelic drug issue on the ballot this year is something that will take a great deal. And actually, it's built in that it takes a few years. But they should not use the marijuana model to try and figure out how you're going to legislate regarding psychedelics if it passes and if the legislature takes it up.
Yeah, what happened to all that money that was supposed to be flowing into the cities and towns? The first question this year is polling, at least, overwhelmingly popular. This is the question about whether State Auditor Diana DeZoglio should be able to audit the state legislature. Many have said that this raises some constitutional issues of separation of church and state. Others have said the legislature has it coming because they've exempted themselves, as I said before, from public records law, from open meeting law, doing a lot of their work in secret. Where do you come down on this? The auditor being able to audit the legislature, Scott?
So first of all, Jack, you said that you were going to throw Jacob and I in a curve in the first few minutes, and you just said that you're separating church and state. So I caught the curve. I don't know what we get for that, but it's basically separating the legislative body from a constitutional officer that's not involved.
It's not meant to be a curve. It was meant to be
No, it's perfect. And if there's some sort of prize, I'm going to split this with Jacob. But I think this this is power to the people. I am for the auditor auditing the legislative body rather, but it's got to be within constitutional confines. So it can't just be a willy-nilly, we're going to open up every door here, try and figure out what you spend your time on, how the legislators actually enact legislation, how many hearings, that kind of a thing. If it's a legitimate reason to audit them, I think it's got to be completely transparent. The legislature's got to cooperate. So I am voting yes on question one, but I also want this to be hashed out between the auditor and the legislatures, and I also want it to be hashed out by the court to make sure it's constitutional. But I think a very, very good, and you mentioned it before, good step towards transparency. Every time we look to get transparency in government, whether it's on the local level, the state level, even the federal level, we have to file a Freedom of Information Act request. We're fighting, the press is out there banging away. This is a good step towards transparency, I think.
How about you, Jacob? The state Republican Party has taken a position in favor of this question, but what's your thoughts on it?
So this is the one question where I break with the state party. I'm with them in spirit. I'm with Scott in spirit and the auditor. I actually, when I was a staff member in the House of Representatives in the minority party, I think we had 29 Republican representatives out of 160, and the auditor Diana was a fellow staff member as well. So I actually just communicated with her yesterday about this question. I'm with the auditor in spirit. The state party's position is that a vote yes will unveil the secrets on Beacon Hill and open up a new level of transparency. I honestly think that while, again, I'm with them on spirit, I think the people are being sold a false bill of goods here. This inevitably will probably get kicked up to the Supreme Judicial Court. I foresee Senate President Spilka and Speaker Mariano extremely opposed to this when it passes. And I say when it passes, I was just reading statistics here. The latest poll had it at 70% of likely voters support auditing the legislature, with only 8% opposed. So I think this is probably the most certain outcome on election day, is that this question will pass. For me, though,
Why do you think it's so popular, Jacob?
well, I mean, I think 47% of the electorate were just recently polled. They disapprove of the legislature. It's like Congress. People disapprove of the body, but they love their state rep or their state senator for whatever reason. And it's just the way it is. Voice votes, executive sessions. Again, being in a member of the minority party up there, I was able to witness firsthand, some of the backroom deals that occur. These committee hearings where every bill deserves a right to be heard. Some would call it a sham. It is a very top-down approach from leadership, at least in the House. I recently spoke to a Democrat legislator on the South Coast and a Republican one. They're both for auditing the legislature, which I was surprised at the Democrat response. But for me, it comes down to a separation of powers issue. I think for me, that super all other arguments. And ultimately, I'd love to see the legislature open their books. I just don't know if the state auditor has statutory authority.
Scott, do you think that the state auditor will be inclined to come up with that kind of constitutional compromise that you mentioned? So to do this audit within the confines of the law? Scott?
So Jack, please repeat that.
So you had mentioned that you hope that if this does pass, that the auditor and the legislature will work out a compromise where they can do this audit within the confines of the law so that it does not violate this separation of powers thing. Do you think the auditor will be inclined to go along with that?
Well, what's funny is I think she was. I think with this referendum, she may not be now, depending on how it passes. But I also think that if it goes to court, everyone is leery that the court's can look at it and say it's a clear separation of powers type of an issue, and she may end up with much less type of authority, if any at all, if it goes through the court. So I would hope that they would compromise. I have met with her. I think she's, it's refreshing. She certainly has captured the imagination of the people from the standpoint of an oversight type of a role. I also think, though, that, again, what Jacob said is exactly right. The legislature, in the eyes of the public, is broken. It's broken. It's top down. It's not responsive. They feel that it is completely isolated from a public process. Hence, you get these type of referendums. This one goes directly at them. And it's going to be an interesting thing how it plays out. But if the higher the percentage goes, the more likely it is that she's going to say, I'm here to look at X, Y, or Z. When she crosses the line, then the courts are going to get involved, I would think, pretty quickly. And we'll see how far she actually can go. There's got to be a separation between all these the constitutional officers and the legislative and the executive branch. There has to be. But I also don't think that stonewalling and always saying no to any request. I mean, someone asks for your on-time texts or your on-time emails, and you campaign and say you're going to divulge them, and then you say, maybe I'm not going to. That makes the public say to themselves, what the heck is going on here? We think we need to take a look at this. So if it's almost a pox on your house when you end up having a referendum question and 70% plus or 60% plus are saying, let's do something that's completely unconventional. And it means there's a problem and they've got to address it.
Okay, let's go on to the second question. Of all the questions, this may be the one that affects the most people, and certainly everybody who has children, and even if you don't have children, will have strong opinions about this. And that is, should the requirement that students pass the MCAS test to get a high school diploma be eliminated? There are, like all questions, there are two good sides to this one. On the one hand, You have the fact that Massachusetts has the highest achievement records of high schools in the country, of public high schools in the country. Why would we not think that the MCAS requirement has something to do that? On the other hand, the statistics all show that English language learners and students with disabilities fail the MCAS requirement at a far higher rate than other students of color. And New Bedford, the numbers in New Bedford are staggering. 90% of students with disabilities fail at the first time they try, and 80% of English language learners. So should the MCAS be eliminated, Jacob?
I need to be very careful in case any of my teacher friends are watching right now. I've talked to quite a few educators in the last couple of weeks on this, and my personal view is that it should not be eliminated. I believe that's the state party's view, the Republican Party as well, and I believe it's the view of the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate President. So going back to what we said earlier, whether or not this passes or not, I think it's a long road ahead before the requirement would be eliminated. You know, Massachusetts leads the nation in math, English, and sciences. When this education reform occurred back in the 90s, and I know Mayor Lang dealt with this head on while he was mayor, and I think he made very great points, just like some of my teacher friends. I believe it's my personal view that the incentive for educators, administrators, parents, and students having that graduation requirement there improves all scores across the board. With regards to the several hundred students with severe cognitive issues or disabilities, I think the state and the legislature really ought to tackle it, strengthening the accommodations that those kids have at taking the test. And for people watching, 10th grader taking this exam, the graduation exam, they still have several shots at the apple if for some reason they're having a bad day, personal issue, or just a bad academic day. I believe they have two shots in their junior year to take it and two shots their senior year, in addition to other avenues to obtain that high school diploma. So, while I understand the merits from many of the teachers that, we're teaching to a test, we're not as creative in the classroom, and undue stress on students. And I think all of those points are well taken. And I am a little torn. I do ultimately think that voting no is the best course. And if education reform needs to occur, again, let the state legislature tackle that.
So Scott, the New Bedford City Council, the school committee, State Representative Tony Cabral, Superintendent O'Leary, most of the local powers that be have said eliminate it. What's your take on this?
So I would like to say I'm the George Washington of the elimination of the MCAS test. And I identified that in 2006 in my first State of the City as something that was going to be extremely problematic for public schools. First, let me just say this. I originally said I'll take the test. I breezed through the English. When I got to the math, I realized I'm going to turn in my degree from high school, my degree, which is a Regents degree, by the way, from New York, my degree from Marquette, my degree from Georgetown Law. So what it comes down to is simply this. If I went to Stang, I don't know how to spell MCAS. If I go to Tabor, I don't know how to spell it. If I send in a Tabor or Stang or any other parochial or private school diploma, our Massachusetts State University College system recognizes that diploma the same way they would an MCAS diploma. MCAS diplomas now have been shown that they do not predict success in college. They don't predict success, quite frankly, in high school. So my gut feeling is don't eliminate testing, but eliminate high stakes testing. We all tested. We all took the Iowa test, whatever it was, when we were kids. They tested us each year to make sure that we were meeting national standards, local standards. Leave the idea of who decides whether someone has passed a course to the people who are actually teaching the course, spending time with the kids, and go forward. I don't think anybody was being pushed through. There were some examples, but quite frankly, I think this was the flavor of the month regarding no one can read, no one can write, no one can work at McDonald's or a Dunkin' Donut anymore, and we've got to have this standardized test. Standardized tests have increased the education gap between minority kids, second language kids, and kids that come from a better zip code, a better financial demographic area. In addition, you have a situation here where, from my perspective, they've gutted all electives in the grammar schools and in the high schools in order to teach to a test. I have been in classrooms where they teach to the test, where they indicate if the question says shall, then the answer is going to say shall. If the question says may, the answer is going to say may. It's great to learn how to do a bubble test if you do it in sequence. If you write on your bubble test, answer to number 1, and then somehow miss answer number 3 and put it in number 4, you're going to pass the test anyway. So the answer is they're teaching you how to take a bubble test, not teaching you the substance that you need. Read books, get extra help, whatever it is, but have kids basically live a full high school life, a full grammar school life, a full junior high school life, and move forward. We are number 1 in just about every category, as Jacob said, around the country. It's got nothing to do with the MCAS. Each year, and this is a low number, but each year, 750 kids are, and this is a term that I think they adopted because I was kicking the heck out of it, are non-graduating completers. I'm going to say it again so everyone gets this. Non-graduating completers. It's different from being a dropout because it means you stayed in school, but you are non-graduating completer. You don't walk across. Actually, you do walk across and you get a non-graduating completer certificate. So those 750 each year that are around the state, and I think that's a low figure because when I was tracking it, it was over 1,000 kids, but 750 kids times 20 years is 15,000. 15,000 kids, they say the equivalent, a dropout or the equivalent costs society $250,000 in the course of their life for support. That is over $3 billion that we've come up with in unfunded liabilities to take care of kids who did everything you're supposed to do with a high school quarterback, worked as a cheerleader, maybe been on the debate society, or a special ed child who came to work to school every day, did not get a degree, and now society is supporting them. Instead of giving them a degree, a high school degree, see what happens next. The same way a kid at Stanger, the way a kid at Tabor would get. So it's an unfunded liability. It goes up every year and it's holding kids back. Why would we do that? And it's not a predictor of whether you're going to be successful in society or successful in college. It is a nice flavor of the month, tremendous bureaucratic boondoggle that people have made a lot of money on. But now give it back to the teachers, give it back to the parents, the kids, tutors, whatever it is. Let's teach kids a full education and go forward. So I am completely for eliminating the MCAS test as a graduation requirement. Last, if you want to do an MCAS graduation requirement and you want to set it up like the Regents diploma, have at it. And you want kids to say, I'll take the MCAS and I'll get a different diploma. And then for some reason, our own higher education system recognizes it, which they don't now, then I'm all for it and let's talk. But as long as you put this basically collar around kids who aren't good test takers or have a bad day, as Jacob said, I think we are completely destroying our education system. So that's how I look at it. I have not changed my opinion on this from the first day I looked at it and realized I can't pass it.
Now, Scott, when you say you're the George Washington of this issue, I remember when, correct me if I have a detail wrong, but my recollection is that when you were first mayor, you said that we weren't going to use the MCAS to give diplomas in New Bedford, and the state's heavy hand came down and said that we're not going to give you state aid if you do that. Is that the way it went down?
That's exactly right. And the funny thing was that the day after I said it, Governor Romney was here for a very, very sad event, which was a funeral for, I believe it was Michael Ford, who had died in action. And he sat with me this entire time, rode with me in a car, saw me. And this is after I gave Governor Romney an autographed book that his father had written, okay, to try and pick up some credibility with Governor Romney. And he never said a word about it. And he went back to Boston and called me at like 4 o'clock that day and said, I just want to let you know, I've heard your position on MCAS and we're not going to be able to fund you if you don't subscribe to the MCAS. And I said, Governor, you probably should have told me that when I saw you today, and I would have been happy to go back and forth with you on this. There are darn good reasons that I don't think we should be doing this. 20 years later, it's only gotten worse. The education gap has gotten further from the standpoint of the kids who need the help the most. And I continue to be against it. And I'm sure Governor Romney would call me right now and say you're out of order, but that's the way it is. And
there you go. Former Mayor Lang has been walking the walk on this issue. I just want to go back to Jacob to wrap up. Any response to Scott's argument that the MCAS doesn't really have much to do with Massachusetts high achievement on high schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's debatable. Look, Massachusetts, I think the statistic that the Tufts Center for Policy had put out, they did an analysis on all these questions. If your listeners want to go and do a deep dive, 90% of students pass the MCAS on the first try, and 96% of students pass it before their graduation date. And so I think again, and I don't usually say this, but I agree with the Governor Healy on this. If we eliminate the MCAS requirement, we're going to have 351 different standards across the state for each municipality. And again, I'd prefer to see this go back to the legislature and have them go through the reforms that are needed. And again, back on the few kids, I think, of the 70,000 kids who passed the MCAS, I think we're looking at about 700 to 1,000, as Scott mentioned. There are reforms that we can make to help better accommodate those children, kids with cognitive issues, English as a second language, et cetera. So I don't think turning the whole system on its head is necessary at this point, at least via ballot question.
So Jacob, I appreciate what you said. I do want to say a couple of quick things. First, as far as I don't agree with the governor that there'd be 351 different standards. DESE still determines all standards. We all would have the same standard as Tabor or Stang anyway, at the very least, which seems to get people wherever they need to go. And secondly, I would say if it took 20 years for them to determine that they're leaving all these kids behind, let's stop it now and move forward. Let's stop it, and then you want to come up with another idea, I'm all for it. But this is a system that I think is failed in a dramatic way. 60% of the kids who pass MCAS are allegedly ready for college. 40% who pass MCAS have remedial courses in college to get ready for college. I think MCAS is superfluous. Doesn't mean a darn thing. It's like when I see New Bedford saying, let's publish our top 10 graduates. We've always had top 10 graduates. We've always had in fact, here's what it comes down to. We're always playing for the kids just below the mean to try and make sure that we give them the best education. The kids above it are always going to be above it. It depends on someone getting up like you, getting up saying to your kids or me, did you do your homework yet? Let's read a book tonight. Let's make sure that you have every opportunity to get the best education. A lot of it is dictated by the home and not by a bubble test. So there is remediation to do, but I don't think MCAS is part of it.
Okay, so about halfway through our program, let's move on to question 3, which is another good one. And this is, should Uber and Lyft, transportation network drivers, be allowed to unionize? Again, there are different sides to this. One is, and I didn't realize this, if an Uber driver or a Lyft driver has a problem, a dispute with a customer, he has no vehicle to plead his case, according to some drivers, in a way that gives him a chance of not being suspended. On the other hand, people say that this is an industry that is working well. It has really revolutionized the cab industry. Why would we tinker with it? Let's start with you on this one, Scott. Should Uber and Lyft be allowed to unionize?
So it's funny on this, Jack. My answer to this is yes. My answer also is that they put so much detail in this and their explanation that this has to go to the legislature or has to go to a rulemaking authority or has to go to the Mass Labor Relations Commission because it is so convoluted. The average person, if this was not as simple as should they be able to unionize or not, everyone would say, I can't vote on this when I don't get it. They've gone so far into the details on this thing that it makes your eyes swirl. And both of us do this. Both of us work on labor law, and we're looking at it saying, like, what the heck? So I think they should be able to unionize, but I also think that the details need to come later. I saw they threw some details out. It's clear to me that very few people in Massachusetts sat down and tried to figure out how we get this done. But should you be able to unionize? Yeah, I'm all for that. I'd vote yes on this and hope that someone would look at it and try and figure out how you take this Rube Goldberg sidebar to this question and figure out how it would work.
Yeah, it's kind of complex because I didn't realize this, but when she was Attorney General, Maura Healey actually worked out a deal with them where they are being paid the $15 minimum wage, even higher. So I'm not exactly sure. I guess it's the grievance procedure. Jacob, what do you think?
So the Massachusetts Republican Party, is recommending a no vote. I generally tend to agree with that position. The arguments that the party cites, it threatens a yes vote would threaten affordability and flexibility. I've taken over the course of the last 15 years probably 4,000 or 5,000 Uber rides personally, whether for work or personal use, and I've chatted with some of these drivers. A lot of these folks enjoy the flexibility of being an independent contractor as opposed to being treated as an employee. Now, there are a lot of, as Scott knows, a lot of federal and state laws and court rulings that determine what makes a contractor versus an employee. And we could be in the weeds on that all day. Generally speaking, though, from a sort of a high level view of this, Uber and Lyft and these other rideshare industries sort of came about in this tech boom. And what you saw, in my opinion, was ingenuity and a new way to do business. Obviously, the taxi cab folks and their medallions were not a huge fan, and it really disrupted the transportation system as a whole from a government perspective. I think generally, though, the industry has been very successful. Look, you have a lot of folks who for whatever reason, don't have access to a GATRA or a CERTA or regional transportation, and Uber and Lyft is an affordable means to get from point A to point B, whether you're a veteran getting to a VA hospital or a senior citizen going to do grocery shopping. And so I would just worry, and I think the state party has communicated this, I think just general affordability issues if this were to get implemented. Of the day, like we said, this is something that's so complex, it creates a new regulatory system, and I think without a doubt, it would have to go through the legislature.
Well, what about though this ability of an individual driver to grieve? You guys are labor lawyers to grieve a suspension. You're dependent on this income, and there's a dispute between you and a customer, and all of a sudden you're locked out for a month.
I've had calls on that. There is a fledgling elemental way for a driver to try and appeal that, but it is not very effective. The devil in this is going to be in the details, Jack, and it's because can they unionize? How will they unionize? What is the appropriate number? How many people will qualify to be within a union? What then will be the grievance processes? What will be the collective bargaining processes? It gets very complicated. Should they be able to unionize? In theory, I say sure, but I'm not quite sure how the whole thing fits together at this point. And it's going to take. If I would not, here's what I would not do. I wouldn't vote. I'm going to vote for it, but I wouldn't vote for it with the idea that I'm voting for it and it's now going to be institutionalized. Because if that's the case, the whole thing's going to blow up like the Hindenburg, like boom. It's not going to work. So, and in thinking about it, based on working with unions since 1978, before then, but as a lawyer since 78, you're looking at it saying, I don't know that this fits together. I don't want to be on the other side of a case with Jacob trying to explain how this works. And I'm sure he doesn't want to be on the other side telling me why it doesn't. Okay, because I'll immediately say to them, yeah, you're right, it doesn't work. It's a square peg going into what we normally think of as a round hole regarding unionization, collective bargain periods of time, grievances, unfair labor practices. I mean, it's an exception trying to become the status quo. But the idea is, should they be able to unionize? I'm all for it.
It kind of gets you back to that issue that Jacob raised in the beginning about the difficulty with government by referendum. Uh, what do you think? Is it too complex? I do sympathize with these guys who want to grieve. You could have a customer who says, "Well, he took me the long way around," and the driver is thinking, "Yeah, I took him the long way around because there was too much traffic to the summer tunnel." Uh, uh, so it seems to be, uh, it's a complex issue, but some way to refine the system.
So when I first landed in Milwaukee in 1968, the cab driver that I got in at Mitchell Field took me all the wrong way around, showing me all of Milwaukee and charged me about $15 for a $4 ride, and I had $20 for the month. So I'm sympathetic to that. I still want to file a grievance against that guy, right? But I think what it comes down to is if this question simply said, should Uber, Lyft, independent drivers be able to unionize, I would say yes, and I would say that's probably enough to tell the legislature what the voters are thinking about. Once you get into these details, it seems to me that a lot of people may read this and say, I don't, I'm afraid to vote for it. So I think Jacob's point before was exactly right. This may be a flare signal to the legislature, but certainly something that if you tried to implement it, it's a camel. This thing will not, you're trying to build a horse, you built a camel in this question. I don't know how you implement it based on this language.
Any final thoughts, Jacob?
Um, yeah, look, and for the record, I was on the plaintiff side for employment law when I started in my career. So I used to get some grief from my fellow plaintiffs attorneys. I was the only Republican in the plaintiffs bar. But I represented a few folks at some of these rideshare companies over the past. And, in theory, I agree with Scott that folks should be able to unionize. And I do, on the other hand, also agree with the party position that this is affordable for so many people as a means of transportation. And so I'd rather let it go right to the legislature and see how they can deal with it. I am concerned that if it passes and it's implemented, that you're going to see a surge in price for consumers and less flexibility for the independent contractor, the drivers.
And now we come to question 4, my favorite of the 5 ballot questions, because it's so far out of my bailiwick. Should people over 21 be allowed to grow, possess, and use certain psychedelic substances? Now, on the surface, we were talking about mushrooms and other things that people might grow in their own home. On the surface, it seems like a very outlandish proposal, but there is some research, particularly with some veterans who are suffering from PTSD, and some research that these psychedelic substances can help them pierce through some severe depression and issues that they're dealing with. On the other hand, people say, well, there's no regulation. People could be driving. What are we doing here? Just allowing people to grow it in their home. I will say that 2 states, Oregon and Colorado, no surprise, they have already legalized it to some extent. What do you think, Jacob? Should people over 21 be allowed to grow, possess, and use certain psychedelic substances?
Yeah, so I'll start again with the state party position. The state party recommends a no vote here. I tend to fall in line with that particular position. Prior to these ballot questions being printed, I did not give this any thought. And like you, this is far from my wheelhouse. I will say, though, in speaking to other folks within my party and within the Democrat Party, there is a sense out there, sort of a libertarian view that the government ought not to be telling people what to do in their own homes. And so I found that to be interesting in terms of speaking to other Massachusetts voters within my party. But I think by and large, most of the folks I've talked to, legislators, activists, and regular voters, I think most people are against this at this point. I'm not sure where it's polling. The Massachusetts Republican Party cites, of course, health risks, public health risks, safety risks. The Tufts Center for Analysis, Policy Analysis had done some polling and said that drugged driving is on the rise, and one of every three frequent psychedelic users admits to driving on the influence. I'm not sure how true that is, but if it is true, it is problematic for our law enforcement, public safety, road safety in general. And then the other issue is if it passes, how you regulate it. Again, this is another question that I think will go to the legislature. How do you protect, for example, children from ingesting these potential edibles or pets? And then the other argument I heard was that for supervised psychedelic use at these centers, this can often per session 1,000 up to 3,000 when you look at Colorado, and I think you cited Oregon. And so there's a concern that lower income folks who cannot afford a single session, you would be incentivizing folks to be growing this from their home versus using a supervised session. And then obviously there's a black market that could potentially be an issue as well. And I think the last thing, the state party, I think was against the Cannabis Control Commission, adding more government to the state. I believe this would implement a new commission as well. I forget the name, but it's a psychedelic commission similar to the CCC. And so for that reason, I'll be voting no as well.
I just want to mention before we go to Scott that Jacob is going through the Republican Party position on these because the Republican Party has taken a position on all 5 questions. In my research, I did not come across a Democratic Party official position. And I know, for instance, on the MCAS question, different party leaders are divided on it. Just want to say that if people are wondering why we're not saying what the Democratic Party position is. Scott, what about the psychedelic substances in your own home?
So this is I agree with both of you. This is not my bailiwick, number one, Jack. And I also agree that
who's going to admit if it is?
Well, so then I'll say this, that I was against the marijuana referendum. I think that the commission has been less than stellar as far as its performance. It has not produced the kind of financial boon that we expected. It's worked better in Massachusetts than other states, I think, but it's not something that I would say touchdown to. So just the regulatory aspect of this makes me, and the idea that you form another commission makes me a little bit skeptical of it. But I will say one thing that's very important. Anxiety, mental challenges, veterans PTSD are something that I know we need to be very concerned about, and that these herbal medicines, these natural medicines, seem to have a very, very, very favorable reaction towards an awful lot of people. And originally I was just, this is not something that I identify with, and I'm not going to take any position on it. Then I turned on the radio the other day and I heard Alyssa Dusku, who is probably the only celebrity that I know of that's weighed in on any of the referendum questions. And she was very, very articulate about, she's a young actress. Most people know her from watching Bring It On Kids, or won't admit that they've watched Bring It On without their kids. I'm not going to admit either one, but I'm saying that she's a young actress. I think she was in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She has a pretty good IMDb resume, and she's taken this as a personal crusade because she was suffering from mental challenges and got involved with the natural herbalist, I guess, or herbist, whatever it's called, natural medicine, and said that this had tremendous psychological benefits to her. So I almost think that me voting on this is inappropriate because I don't know enough about it. I feel that I have a real responsibility to have people, by and large, I'm a libertarian at heart. So if this helps someone, doesn't hurt anyone, if it's done in a legal way, if it doesn't affect kids and pets, if they can regulate it in a way that's appropriate, I don't have any fight in this. I don't want to hurt anybody in any way. But the way it's written now, it basically is a proposal. It's a proposal that says, let's study this in essence. And giving the legislature, some of these, I'm going to say, you better do this and do it quick. Some of these I'm going to say, you better study it carefully. If this passes, I would say to the legislature, please study this. If it doesn't pass, start having hearings on it. Let's hear from vets. Let's hear from Alyssa Duskew and see exactly how this fits in on our day-to-day type of herbal type medicine. The interesting thing is, if once you open the door on marijuana for medical marijuana, it seems to me that you better have a wide open frame of reference and a wide open mind when other people come and say, there's another natural that has tremendous benefits. So originally I was this is not something I'm interested in. Now my gut feeling on it is I don't know enough about it to be able to say no. I may at the last minute decide yes or no on this, but I think it's up to everyone. The other thing is that I want to emphasize, because I say I'm voting X or Y, it just is how I'm voting. And I'm giving my point of view to both you and Jacob and anybody watching. But everyone should do their own research and make a decision on these ballot questions. They're extremely important. And no one's opinion is right. I mean, it's a ballot question. Do you think it's yes or do you think it's no? We want to hear from you. So on this one, I am kind of like you, Jack. I'm looking at it saying, God, forgive me if I voted no on it and it hurt somebody. I wouldn't want to do that.
No, it's easy to be glib, and it's a serious problem that deserves serious attention. So we'll wrap it up with the fifth and final ballot question, and this is one that everybody probably has feelings about because everybody pays tips. Should the hourly wage for tip workers increase over the next 5 years and gradually come to minimum wage? Again, there are two sides to every issue. One is that it's a disincentive and people work hard for their tips, and why shouldn't they? The other is that not all tip workers do very well. We've all seen the tip jars that have appeared in Dunkin' Donuts and Subways. Those workers are not making a lot of money. So the question is, should tip workers gradually get to the minimum of $15? Where do you come down on that, Scott, or what's your analysis of it?
So it's funny when you originally hear this, my natural instinct was, gee, this makes sense. This would be good for all restaurant workers or people dependent on tips. Then as I started talking to people who work into restaurants, I realized this is if it's not fair, if it's not broken, why are we getting involved in this? And secondly, it may be a disincentive to people leaving tips. It may actually be a cut in salary for most people that I've spoken to. Now, I haven't spoken to everyone, certainly, but my gut feeling on this one is if people are clearly making less than minimum wage, then this needs to be looked at by the AG. This needs to be something that people are very concerned about. But if people are making more than the minimum wage as a result of tips, why would we fool this in any way? And there are so many different after effects that I've heard about this, which is if you base it on the minimum wage, prices naturally will go up, or the disincentive for people to open restaurants may come down. It may not give the added benefit to the servers. In fact, may give them a cut in pay. Last but not least, this idea that you pool it and everybody gets a share of the tips seems to me to be something that not everyone in the restaurant business agrees with or wants. So it's interesting. I'll just say this. A couple of these ballots, ballot questions, seem to come from outside the area. This is one that clearly has come from outside the area that is looking to do a universal type of legislation. through the states rather than through the feds on minimum wage and on restaurant workers. I don't see the hue and cry for it. I'm going to vote against this. If in fact people are being paid less and something needs to be done, they did raise minimum wage just recently in the last several years for restaurant workers. It used to be like $3 or whatever it was, 3.50, whatever. It's gone up now to 6, whatever 50, whatever 75. If someone's underpaid, we ought to all know about it. But if people are making $10, $15, $20 in tips an hour, I'm all for it. I want them to make it. I don't want anyone to come up with a reason as to why I'm not going to tip. And you don't tip unless someone deserves it, as you said, Jack. If they're working hard, if you admire what they're doing, you put down a tip, and it's the easiest thing. Money comes in, there's silver. Say, oh, keep it, put it in the jar. If you decide that someone's done a great job, this is that going through a drive-through, you give them an extra $1. McDonald's kids still don't get tips. I don't see a tip jar for McDonald's. I do see it for Dunkin' Donut, for private places. You go to a diner, right? You're going to add a tip. You go to a restaurant, you're going to add a tip. But some workers don't get it at all. And sometimes you get that kid at the drive-in in Dunkin' in McDonald's did a better job than anyone I saw today. You know, so
Yeah, you just wonder if at a place like Dunkin' Donuts or Subway, if it isn't the purchaser subsidizing the salary of the worker.
there's no doubt it is. There's no
Um,
doubt. But hopefully it subsidizes it well more than just minimum wage.
Let's go to Jacob. Is this a solution in search of a problem? Where do you come down on this one?
Yeah, so just for your viewers' information, the state Republican Party urges a no vote. I agree with the party on that. I agree with Scott on this. I think this is a lose, lose, lose for restaurant and bar owners. It's a lose for the employees, the bartenders, and the wait staff, and it's an ultimate loss for the consumer. Folks that go out and eat. One of my personal pastimes is going out to eat as much as I can, probably too much. And anyone who goes out to eat, even infrequently, you've noticed over the past couple of years how prices have gone up on everyone. So the back end, if you're a restaurant owner, a bar owner, I think this impacts manicurists and pedicurists as well. But if you're running a business, the cost of goods are through the roof right now. The cost of transporting those goods are through the roof. You're seeing restaurants close. I think if this thing passed and the legislature let it pass, I think you could see restaurants close. Other restaurants may lay bartenders or servers off. Some folks have suggested a move towards automation. So remote kiosks and just to lessen the labor impact. So again, I think it's a lose lose lose. And like question 3 with regards to Uber and Lyft, ultimately this is going to come down on the consumer, people who are going out to eat, and people who are already feeling the pain of inflation. This is going to make things, in my opinion, that much worse.
I have a little bit of a personal experience here. I'll just ask a question to you two guys. Has either of you ever worked as a waiter?
I spent 6 months at McDonald's. I know that's a national political issue right now between the two presidential candidates, but I spent 6 months at McDonald's, and I still maintain it's probably the hardest job I've ever had.
Okay. Not exactly a waiter, but
No.
So I worked in Kentucky Fried Chicken as a cook. I can tell you this though, and I'll safeguard the 28 secret spices as long as I live. But what I do want to say is this: I've never seen an apron like Donald Trump had on when he was doing fries, and I guarantee Jacob didn't have one. That's an apron I've never seen before to McDonald's. I completely sympathize with people who work in the restaurant business. That may be one of the hardest jobs. Being a cook at Kentucky Fried, aside from being, sworn to secrecy on the herbs and spices, was a tough job, but it was not like working the counter in any way, ever. That is a tough job.
Okay, so I worked as the fryer later guy at Burger King, so I'll wait on that. But I don't consider those jobs waiting tables. I waited tables at a high-end restaurant on Beacon Hill when I was in graduate school, Dini's Seafood, where all the guys used to go. And I learned when I did that job that there are two tiers of waiters. There are the professional waiters who work full time and waitresses, and they get the best tables and they are the best servers and
Sure.
they make a lot of money. And I mean a lot of money, 50, $60,000. They can put their kids through school. And then there are the part-time waiters like sloughs like me who are going in there and not as fast, not as good, but trying to make a little bit of money. And the minimum wage for waiters when I was there 35, 40 years ago was $2.22 an hour. And there were nights when I went home where I didn't, have more than 3 or 4 tables because I wasn't one of the top tier waiters. And so, yes, there are those top tier waiters and waitresses that make fabulous money in the tips and don't need any help. But in my experience, some of the waiters are not making as much as some of the other ones. So I'll just throw that out in case anybody has any thoughts on that.
So I just want to say that between the three of us, we could have a heck of a chicken burger and fried place. I think that you're exactly right, and that there are an awful lot of let's see if this is really an issue. There may be people who are making less than minimum wage as a result of not having select tables or having the tips come in. I also think there's a market here. The market finds its own level. But if there's a problem with people making under minimum wage, under an exception, then they ought to take a look at that and see what it is. But this takes the thing and turns it on its edge. And I don't think we need it. I also am very, very provincial on this stuff. If it's a national issue that they're trying to bring into Massachusetts, let it grow organically in Massachusetts. We seem to be pretty adept at making sure we have a modern economy and a fair, equitable economy. Someone telling us on Uber, here's the specifics. I'm not for that. On this one, I'm not for turning over the Apple cart. I also want to say that some of these have financial consequences. The Uber does, number 3, 5 does, as was pointed out. 2 doesn't. 2 is going to save us $3 billion. So 2 is something that there's an unfunded liability for kids who don't graduate that we can alleviate our responsibility going forward. So when you look at these economic issues, the economic issues cut in a lot of ways, but 2 is one where we actually save a tremendous amount of money over a period of time for our state. But I think, Jack, that I'd tip the heck out of you if you were my waiter. I'd give you maximum, whatever it is, that 18 on the bill, then I'd put an extra 7% on it, just like that.
Yeah, I think I was tipped the heck out of when people felt sorry for me more than anything else. Trying to do it's a tough job balancing all those things. So let's wrap up. Anything that you want to finally say about these ballot questions, and there's a lot of them to help people as they go in there. We started with Jacob to begin with, so we'll start with you, Scott, at the end.
So I'd simply say this: you can't vote on a ballot question unless you vote. So you got to go vote. And the idea of what you're voting for, you got a presidential contest, you have a U.S. state Senate contest, you've got your congressman, no matter where you're looking at this, your congressman's on the ballot or congressperson's on the ballot, your state legislators, Senate and reps are on the ballot, many of the county races are on the ballot, and then last but not least, you have five ballot questions. If Jack came and served that to you, you'd give him a heck of a tip. You would say, this is the greatest thing that ever happened. I am in this. This is, by the way, this is not something that you sit at home and complain about after you hear it. You watch the results and you say, I voted for X, Y, or Z, or I voted for him or her. Get involved and vote. Read everything. Make sure you know what you're voting for, but get out and vote. Tuesday is going to be a nice day. Get out and vote. Early voting stops tomorrow. I'm sorry. On the 1st in Massachusetts, go vote. You can't be involved unless you vote.
Jacob.
Yeah, and to sum these questions up, regardless of where the parties stand, where you stand, as Scott said, voting is the most important thing. Do your research. Thank you to New Bedford Light and you, Jack, and thanks to you, Mayor Lang. Hopefully we provided some information to your viewers. But ultimately, I'm voting no on all 5, and hopefully, folks can make up their own determination. But ultimately, again, I think questions 2, 3, 4, and 5, if the legislature wants to take it up, I think they will. They'll either, again, ignore the will of the voters or take it up. But ultimately, the most important thing, as Scott said, is making sure the people's voice is heard. And it does give legislators a good barometer of where the public is on these issues.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you, Scott. Thank you, Jacob. I really hope that this has been a model that Republicans and Democrats and journalists can speak civilly to each other and have a conversation where we actually bring our own experiences and our own thoughts about these issues in a respectful way. I thank you both for modeling that tonight.
Happy to be here. Thank you,
Thank you.
Jacob. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Okay, this has been Jack Spillane for the New Bedford Light Chat.